The morning sun filtered through the tall windows of Denver International Airport, casting a warm glow over the polished floors. Travelers bustled around, dragging luggage behind them, checking flight statuses on their phones, and sipping coffee from paper cups emblazoned with logos. Among them, Emily Carter moved quietly through the crowd, her backpack snug against her shoulders and a worn leather journal tucked under one arm. At 19, she could have blended in with any college student heading home for the weekend, yet there was a tension in her posture, a quiet alertness that had become second nature over the years. Her gray hoodie was simple, her jeans unremarkable, but her hazel eyes scanned everything with a focus most wouldn't notice. Emily had always been observant, though she rarely spoke to strangers, content to disappear into the background. Emily approached the gate for Flight 278, Denver to Seattle, and took her assigned seat, 14A, by the window. Around her, passengers settled in. Some chatted with neighbors, others tapped on laptops, scrolling through emails or immersed themselves in the latest streaming shows. The flight attendants moved up and down the aisle, offering beverages, snacks, and polite smiles. Emily listened to the soft hum of conversation but remained silent, headphones in, a small notebook balanced on her lap. She jotted in neat, meticulous handwriting, a habit that helped her think clearly. Today, her journal contained diagrams of flight paths, altitudes, and even sketches of aircraft cockpit layouts, a private obsession most people wouldn't understand. Flying small planes with her grandfather as a child had taught her to notice details others missed, to anticipate changes, and to remain calm when others panicked. It was a skill that now felt almost instinctual. The plane taxied down the runway, engines humming steadily. Emily watched the landscape blur beneath her as the wheels lifted from the ground. The Colorado Rockies stretched across the horizon, snow-capped peaks catching the morning light. Inside the cabin, passengers pressed their faces to the windows, taking photos or daydreaming about their destinations. Emily, in contrast, noted the subtle vibrations and the pitch of the engines. Small details like these were invisible to everyone else, but she recognized them immediately. Her grandfather had drilled her on the importance of awareness, on noticing the things others ignored. "A good pilot sees what's coming before it happens," he had often said. Those words echoed in her mind as she leaned back in her seat. For the first 30 minutes, the flight remained routine. Passengers dozed, read, or scrolled on their phones. A mother tried to calm her toddler as the child squealed with delight over the clouds. Two business travelers chatted about their upcoming meetings in Seattle, laughing nervously at a shared joke. Emily observed quietly, taking mental notes of everyone's behavior. She noticed the slight anxiety in the couple's clasped hands, the mother's repeated glances at the child, and even the subtle tension in the flight attendants' shoulders as they prepared for service. This awareness wasn't intrusive, it was habitual, a way of understanding the environment, predicting potential disruptions, and preparing herself mentally. It was part of her training and part of her personality. Emily was both quiet and vigilant, a combination few could read. The captain's voice finally came over the intercom, steady and professional, announcing the expected flight time and altitude. The monotone of the announcement might have lulled the passengers into complacency, but Emily didn't relax. Her eyes flicked to the wing visible through the window, noting the vibrations and subtle shifts. Her grandfather had taught her to trust her senses, to notice the mechanical rhythm of engines and airframes. At first, it was a subtle observation, almost subconscious, but over time it became instinct. She could detect inconsistencies, unusual shifts, or sounds that indicated potential trouble. Today, however, everything seemed normal, or as normal as commercial aviation could appear on a clear autumn morning. A few minutes later, turbulence rippled through the cabin, more pronounced than the usual bumps from air currents. A cup of coffee sloshed dangerously on a nearby tray table, and passengers instinctively gripped armrests. Emily removed her headphones, her senses sharpening. There was something different, not alarming yet, but a subtle irregularity that set her nerves on edge. She didn't panic. She had learned to separate observation from fear. As the plane stabilized, she relaxed slightly, but her eyes never left the instruments visible in the cockpit. She knew something was always happening, even when it seemed quiet or ordinary. Pilots' lives depended on constant awareness, and Emily had inherited that mindset. As the flight continued over the Rockies, Emily allowed herself a moment of reflection. Her grandfather had been a decorated Air Force pilot, teaching her everything about flying small aircraft, navigation, and emergency procedures. Those lessons were private, informal, and highly practical. They hadn't involved charts of commercial jets, but the principles were the same. Assess the situation, anticipate problems, remain calm, and act decisively. Emily smiled faintly at the memory of those lessons, how he'd let her take control of a small Cessna on calm days, pushing her to trust instincts she hadn't yet understood fully. Those experiences felt distant now, yet in the back of her mind, she replayed them constantly, knowing one day they might matter in ways she couldn't predict. Passengers around her began adjusting for comfort. Blankets were draped over laps, magazines were opened, children were readied with tablets and headphones. Flight attendants moved gracefully down the aisles, securing carts and offering assistance. Emily observed all of this with meticulous detail, the subtle cues that indicated stress or nervousness, the way people prepared for landing even before reaching their destination. She knew intuitively that people could feel tension in the air, even if they couldn't identify it. Her quiet observation skills allowed her to anticipate human reactions, a skill just as critical as knowing how to read engine instruments. As the first part of the flight unfolded, everything seemed ordinary to everyone but Emily. She felt calm, yet ready. The engines hummed steadily, the plane sliced through the clouds, and passengers chatted and relaxed. But somewhere deep inside, Emily knew that her skills, her knowledge, and her calmness were going to be needed sooner than anyone could imagine. She didn't know exactly how or when, but a faint sense of anticipation set her heart racing, not with fear, but with the quiet certainty that she would be called to act. And when that moment came, she would be ready. For 30 minutes after takeoff, Flight 278 seemed routine. Outside, the Colorado Rockies stretched endlessly beneath a sparkling morning sky, sunlight glinting off snow-covered peaks. Inside, passengers chatted lightly, read magazines, and scrolled through phones, oblivious to the subtle signs of trouble that only a trained eye, or a mind trained in observation like Emily's, might notice. She had kept to herself, headphones in, but now her instincts stirred, sensing a faint irregularity in the hum of the engines. It was minor, almost imperceptible, a slight grating tone beneath the usual steady rhythm. She didn't panic, yet, but she felt the familiar tingle of awareness, her grandfather's voice echoing in her mind. Notice everything. Nothing is random. Then came the vibration. It started faint, a quiver that ran through the seats, rattling the cup of coffee on the tray table across the aisle. At first, passengers paid little attention, assuming it was turbulence. But the vibration intensified rapidly, a low thrum that seemed to pulse in time with the plane's engines. Emily's gaze sharpened. The left engine, she could feel it through the vibrations and subtle changes in pitch, was not running smoothly. Her hands, instinctively gripping the armrests, tingled with alertness. Something was wrong. Small planes behaved predictably. Commercial jets were different, but the principle remained. Mechanical failure rarely announced itself subtly and then corrected spontaneously. "Ladies and gentlemen," came the captain's voice over the intercom, calm but carrying an edge of tension Emily recognized immediately. "We are experiencing technical difficulties. Please remain seated and fasten your seat belts. Cabin crew, prepare for precautionary measures." The cabin atmosphere shifted. Passengers exchanged nervous glances. The low murmur of conversation grew tense. Some reached for armrests or gripped the tray tables. Children whimpered, and a mother's voice tried to soothe her toddler while betraying her own worry. Drinks sloshed on trays. Flight attendants hustled through the aisles, attempting to maintain composure, offering reassurance, though their smiles were tight and strained. Emily, meanwhile, had removed her headphones completely. Her eyes scanned the cabin briefly, but her attention remained firmly on the subtle cues of the plane's performance. The vibration became a tremor. The left engine let out a metallic screech that froze the blood in Emily's veins, though her expression remained calm externally. The plane lurched violently, a jolt that threw several passengers against their armrests. Someone gasped loudly. A beverage spilled across the floor. Emily instinctively noted the precise timing of each jolt, the subtle sway of the fuselage, and the irregular sound of the engine. She understood exactly what was happening: a compressor failure. In a small plane, such a failure might be catastrophic. In a commercial jet, the pilots had protocols, but only if they remained calm and executed them precisely. From the cockpit, alarms began flashing in rapid succession. The red lights reflected off the cabin ceiling, drawing wide-eyed stares. The first officer called out a string of warnings, clipped and tense. Captain Harris's jaw tightened as he assessed the situation. "We need to stabilize immediately," he muttered under his breath. Emily could hear it just faintly through the hum of engines and murmuring passengers. She recognized that tone, the calm urgency of a trained professional facing an unexpected emergency. Her pulse quickened. She had never been inside a cockpit of a jet this large during a real emergency, but the principles were identical: stabilize, assess, prepare, and act. The cabin jolted again, sending a trolley careening down the aisle. A young man screamed, clutching his arm where a drink had splashed. Panic began to spread. The captain's voice came again, firmer this time, reverberating through the cabin. "Attention, passengers. We are experiencing a serious engine issue. Please remain seated. Flight attendants, secure the cabin. Prepare for precautionary measures." Emily felt a surge of responsibility. She was a passenger. She should remain quiet, stay calm, and follow instructions. But she also knew her skills, her grandfather's lessons, her small plane experience could be of use. Every microsecond counted. Her mind raced. Engine failing, altitude dropping slightly, cabin pressure stable, turbulence increasing. What next? She weighed the possible scenarios, mentally running procedures she had practiced in simulations and personal flights. Her fingers itched to act, to intervene, though she had no official authority. Another violent shudder shook the plane. This time, drinks toppled completely, and a child screamed. The mother clutched her tightly, whispering reassurances through tears. Flight attendants braced themselves, trying to maintain order as the aircraft pitched and rolled slightly with each jolt. From the cockpit, an alarm shrieked sharply. Emily's ears picked up the sequence and rhythm instinctively. The warning indicated serious compressor malfunction. The plane could still be stabilized if the crew managed it carefully, but time was running short. Captain Harris's voice cracked slightly over the intercom, tension unmistakable now. "If there is any pilot on board, please make yourself known immediately. We need assistance. Any pilot, step forward." The cabin fell silent. Heads turned in confusion. Passengers froze, some whispering nervously. The child stopped crying, sensing the tension in the adults' voices. Emily's heart pounded, but she didn't hesitate. She stood slowly, feeling the eyes of strangers on her. Trembling slightly, she said, "I have flying experience, small planes." Her voice was steady, though her pulse raced. A flight attendant's eyes widened. "Small planes, do you mean a Cessna?" she asked. Emily nodded. The murmurs grew louder. People exchanged incredulous glances, some laughing nervously, others skeptical. Yet the captain didn't hesitate. He gestured toward the cockpit. Emily walked briskly down the aisle, backpack bouncing lightly on her shoulders. Passengers stared, whispering, trying to comprehend how a quiet college student could possibly be the answer to a life-threatening situation at 19,000 feet. She reached the cockpit door and took a deep breath. Inside, alarms flashed, lights pulsed red, and the air was thick with tension. Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez looked up at her, eyes a mixture of disbelief and desperation. Emily nodded at them. "I know how to help stabilize. I've flown single-engine aircraft my whole life." The captain's jaw tightened, a decision forming instantly. "Get in. We have no time to waste. Emily climbed into the jump seat, removing her jacket and setting it aside. She scanned the controls, absorbing the situation at a glance. The plane trembled again, pitching slightly. The first officer gave a clipped, tense report, engine pressure falling rapidly. Emily's mind raced through options: trim adjustments, throttle balance, altitude management. She could do this. She must do this. Outside, the Rockies gleamed in the morning light, indifferent to the chaos above them. Inside, 184 lives depended on a quiet, determined girl who had spent countless hours learning to fly small planes with her grandfather. Nothing could prepare the passengers for what was about to unfold, but Emily was ready. Calmly, methodically, she began issuing precise instructions to the captain. Reduce the bank, increase trim, don't fight the roll. Her voice was soft, controlled, but in those words lay the difference between catastrophe and survival. Plane trembled again, more violently this time. Emily's hands hovered over controls, scanning instruments, calculating adjustments on instinct. The captain glanced at her, realizing she might actually be the key to keeping Flight 278 in the air. Outside, clouds moved lazily across the peaks, unaware of the emergency unfolding within the fuselage. Inside, the air was tense, but Emily remained the calm center of the storm, ready to guide the aircraft through whatever came next. The cabin had fallen into a tense silence. Every passenger felt it, the subtle, creeping awareness that something had gone terribly wrong. Drinks were forgotten, conversations had ceased, and even the most casual travelers gripped their armrests tightly, watching the subtle vibrations that rocked the plane. Emily stood in the aisle, heartbeat steady but rising, her backpack bouncing slightly against her back. Around her, whispers circulated, some skeptical, some incredulous, about the quiet college student stepping forward. She hadn't imagined this moment, she had never expected it. Yet, instinctively, she felt ready. Her grandfather's voice echoed in her mind. When others freeze, you act. Are you sure? The flight attendant asked, eyes wide. Emily nodded. Yes, I can help. Small planes, but I know how to stabilize a plane. Her words were calm, precise. They seemed to cut through the panic like a blade, though doubt still lingered in some eyes. She could feel the weight of attention pressing down, the magnitude of expectation unspoken but clear. Lives depended on action. There was no time for hesitation. The captain's voice returned, booming over the intercom with growing urgency. Any pilot on board, we need assistance immediately. This is a critical emergency. The words hung in the cabin like thunder. Some passengers shifted uneasily. A few muttered, unsure if it was a joke or a genuine call for help. Emily ignored the murmurs. She didn't have the luxury of fear or distraction. She walked down the aisle toward the cockpit, past the wide eyes of passengers who now watched with a mix of awe and disbelief. The plane shuddered violently, and a man near her stumbled, clutching the seat in front of him. Emily maintained perfect balance, her focus entirely on the task ahead. The cockpit door opened, and Emily was met with a scene of controlled chaos. Warning lights flashed across the panel, casting red and orange reflections across the faces of Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez. Alarms blared sharply, each tone signaling a different potential disaster. The air smelled faintly of overheated circuits, and tension radiated from every surface. The captain's eyes locked on her, a mixture of skepticism, urgency, and hope. "Can you help?" he asked almost rhetorically. Emily climbed into the jump seat, settling her backpack aside. She scanned the instruments quickly but methodically: engine output, altitude, airspeed, trim controls, and warning indicators. The aircraft was pitching slightly, the left engine faltering dangerously, but it wasn't uncontrollable. Her instincts from flying single-engine planes kicked in immediately. "We need to stabilize the plane first," she said softly, her voice surprisingly firm. "Reduce the bank on the left, trim slightly right. Don't fight the yaw, we can balance it." The captain blinked, his face tense but trusting her judgment. "Do it," he said. He and the first officer coordinated with her, executing her instructions while monitoring other systems. The plane responded slowly, imperceptibly at first, but then more steadily. Emily's heart raced, but her expression remained calm. Every adjustment mattered. Too much or too little could destabilize the aircraft further. Outside the cockpit window, the Rockies stretched endlessly, indifferent to the life-or-death struggle taking place above them. Meanwhile, the cabin remained tense but quiet. Passengers were unsure what was happening, sensing only that the emergency was grave. A mother whispered softly to her child, trying to mask fear. A businessman gripped the armrest and closed his eyes. Flight attendants moved briskly but carefully, securing loose items and calming anxious passengers. No one could have predicted that salvation might come in the form of a quiet college student, but Emily's presence and her calm, precise instructions in the cockpit were gradually shifting the course of events. Emily continued issuing directions. Throttle on the right engine slightly increase. Keep the left engine idle as much as possible. Maintain altitude. Monitor vertical speed carefully. Her voice was measured, each word deliberate, conveying calm authority. The captain followed her lead, surprised by her clarity. He had flown jets for decades, but he had never encountered a civilian, let alone a college student, who could offer such precise guidance in an emergency. The plane rocked again, turbulence adding pressure to an already delicate situation. Emily focused, blocking out fear and distraction. Her mind raced through every scenario she had ever practiced with her grandfather: engine failure, rapid descent, crosswinds, emergency landing. Each principle translated seamlessly to the larger aircraft. She didn't hesitate. Decisions were immediate, precise, and effective. The plane responded, wobbling less with each correction, slowly regaining some stability. The first officer monitored the systems and confirmed Emily's observations. "She's right," he muttered under his breath. "If we follow her instructions, we can make this manageable." Captain Harris nodded, now working in tandem with Emily, trusting her instincts. The alarms continued to sound, the plane quivering, but gradually the violent sways became less pronounced. Emily's calm presence was stabilizing not only the aircraft but the cockpit crew's nerves as well. As the plane flew over jagged mountain terrain, Emily maintained her composure. She called out small adjustments, each one critical. "Flaps 20, maintain speed. Check rudder trim, do not overcorrect. Watch the roll steady now." Her words were short but commanding. Captain Harris followed them without hesitation. Outside the cockpit windows, clouds drifted lazily, oblivious to the emergency unfolding below. Inside, Emily's mind worked with rapid precision, converting intuition and training into actionable commands. The cabin began to feel the subtle difference. The violent jolts were less frequent, the plane's pitch more predictable. Passengers noticed the change instinctively, sensing a slight easing of danger, though they didn't understand why. Emily's quiet authority in the cockpit, invisible to them, had begun to stabilize not only the aircraft but the tension in the cabin. Each breath she took was calm, measured, and deliberate, a sharp contrast to the fear all around her. Then came another tremor, stronger than before, jolting the plane sideways. Emily's eyes narrowed. "Hold the bank, adjust trim left slowly, maintain current altitude," she instructed. The plane responded more quickly this time. Captain Harris looked at her, astonished by her precision. "Where did you learn this?" he asked quietly. Emily's only response was a small nod, her focus unwavering. Experience and instinct were guiding her now. She didn't have time to explain, and there was no need. Minutes passed in a tense rhythm. Minor adjustments, small corrections, gradual stabilization. Outside, the Rockies glimmered and the plane continued its perilous journey. Inside, Emily's presence remained the anchor in the storm. She knew the next steps would be critical: contacting air traffic control, preparing for potential emergency landing, coordinating with the captain. But for now, the plane was steady enough to take the next actions deliberately, and the lives of every passenger depended on the decisions she made in those precious moments. Emily's voice remained calm, steady, and commanding. She was no longer just a passenger. She was the difference between panic and survival, the quiet force steering Flight 278 away from disaster. And although no one else could yet fully appreciate it, The crisis had shifted from chaos to controlled tension, thanks to the presence of a young woman who refused to let fear dictate the outcome. The stage was set for the next critical chapter, preparing to land a crippled jet under extreme circumstances. The cockpit smelled faintly of warmed metal and electrical circuitry, the kind of sharp, sterile odor that always made Emily's senses sharpen. Alarms flashed relentlessly, and warning lights cast an almost apocalyptic glow over the confined space. Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez were tense, hands flying over controls, eyes darting between instruments, calculations happening in real time. Emily slipped into the jump seat, her legs almost too short to reach the pedals comfortably, but her mind was razor-focused. She scanned every panel, every gauge, every dial. Instantly, she could tell which readings were critical and which were background noise. The plane still shuddered under the weight of a failing left engine, its pitch unpredictable, yawing subtly with each gust of wind. Turbulence tossed the fuselage, making even minor adjustments feel monumental. Emily's heart beat faster, but her face remained calm, her movements precise. She had flown single-engine aircraft dozens of times with her grandfather, learning the subtleties of thrust, trim, and bank adjustments. Though commercial jets were vastly different, the same principles applied. Balance the forces, anticipate shifts, and maintain control. Captain Harris turned to her, a flicker of skepticism mixed with desperation. "All right, you're in. Let's hear your plan." Emily's voice was measured but firm. "First, stabilize the plane. Right engine, maintain current output. Left engine, we minimize strain. Use rudder trim slowly to correct yaw. Don't overcompensate." The captain's hands moved in sync with hers as he executed the first adjustments. The plane quivered, then gradually steadied, responding to their coordinated actions. Emily's mind raced, calculating variables faster than anyone in the cockpit might expect. Altitude, airspeed, roll, pitch, wind direction, engine performance, all of it had to be considered in real time. She began issuing continuous instructions, concise but precise. Flaps 20 degrees, maintain airspeed. Adjust trim 3 clicks to the right. Reduce bank slightly, hold steady. Vertical speed under 300 feet per minute. Monitor engine temp. Each command translated into immediate action, keeping the aircraft stable in the face of mechanical failure and turbulent air. The first officer glanced at her, astonished. "She knows exactly what she's doing," he muttered under his breath. Captain Harris nodded subtly. Despite initial doubt, they were already following Emily's lead. She had become the anchor in a storm that could have easily turned into disaster. The plane, once erratic and unpredictable, now responded with measurable stability. Even minor corrections felt manageable, and the alarms, though still shrieking, no longer seemed insurmountable. Outside, clouds shifted lazily, oblivious to the life-or-death struggle within the fuselage. Inside, the cabin remained tense. Passengers gripped seats and whispered prayers, unaware of the precise calculations being executed mere feet away. Flight attendants moved methodically, securing loose items and reassuring nervous travelers, though every face reflected the strain of the situation. Emily's calm presence in the cockpit began to ripple through the aircraft indirectly. The violent sways decreased, the tremors lessened, and an uneasy sense of hope started to replace sheer panic. Emily adjusted the controls again, this time with a focus on airspeed management. Increase throttle slightly on the right engine. Left engine remains idle. Maintain altitude at 19,000 feet. Reduce yaw to the left, slowly, steadily. Her voice carried authority despite her youth. Captain Harris followed her instructions without hesitation, impressed by her clarity and decisiveness. She was methodical, precise, and unflinchingly calm, qualities that were slowly convincing the crew and herself that control could be regained. As the aircraft leveled out, Emily's mind turned to what came next, preparing for emergency landing. "We'll need to coordinate with air traffic control immediately. They need to clear the nearest runway," she said. The captain nodded, picking up the radio to contact controllers. Every second counted. The plane was stable for now, but conditions could deteriorate at any moment. Emily continued monitoring gauges, calling out minor adjustments as turbulence shook the plane intermittently. Roll correction 3 degrees left. Keep flaps at 20. Don't overcompensate. Her calm authority began to affect the cockpit. The captain, once tense and doubtful, now trusted her implicitly. The first officer, initially skeptical, followed her guidance carefully, executing adjustments with precision. Emily's focus never wavered. Her grandfather's voice echoed, "Stay calm, trust your training, act decisively." This was more than instinct. It was muscle memory, intuition, and knowledge fused into action. She felt a strange clarity, the kind that only emerges when you are fully immersed in critical responsibility. Minutes passed in this tense rhythm. Alarms continued to blare, but the aircraft had become manageable. Emily's instructions were rhythmic, predictable, and precise. Throttle on right, engine steady. Rudder trim 2 clicks right. Airspeed stable. Watch vertical speed. Altitude stable at 19,000. Flaps 20 maintained. Roll steady. Outside, clouds rolled past. Inside, every action mattered. She didn't notice the sweat dripping down her forehead, the tension coiling in her shoulders, or the silent prayers of passengers behind her. She only focused on the task, keeping the plane in controlled flight. The captain finally broke a tense silence. "Emily, how did you learn this?" he asked quietly, still monitoring instruments. She offered a small smile, though her eyes never left the gauges. "My grandfather taught me small planes. The principles are the same. Balance, trim, control, apply them carefully. I can help guide this plane safely, but we need to work together." His skepticism had vanished. Now there was trust, coordination, and a shared sense of purpose. As Flight 278 flew over rugged mountains, Emily maintained the delicate balance between engine output, airspeed, and altitude. Every movement was critical, every adjustment a potential difference between life and death. Outside, the landscape moved silently beneath them, unaware of the drama above. Inside, the plane gradually stabilized, the violent jolts decreasing in intensity. Emily's calm, methodical guidance had begun to transform the emergency from uncontrollable chaos to a manageable crisis. The stage was set for the next phase, emergency landing. Emily and the crew had stabilized Flight 278, but challenges remained. Turbulence, engine failure, and the immense responsibility of landing a commercial jet loomed ahead. Yet in that cockpit, Emily had become the linchpin, the quiet yet decisive force keeping the plane in controlled flight. Every passenger, every crew member depended on her focus, clarity, and courage. And although the worst was not yet over, one undeniable truth had emerged. Emily Carter, the quiet college student, had proven she could rise to the occasion in the face of extraordinary adversity. The sky outside had turned from calm blue to a patchwork of clouds, some thick and gray, hinting at the turbulent air currents that awaited Flight 278. Inside the cockpit, Emily Carter's focus was absolute. Every flicker of a gauge, every vibration in the fuselage, and every subtle shift in altitude commanded her attention. She had stabilized the plane to a manageable level, but turbulence combined with the failing engine meant every moment was a test of precision. One wrong move, and the aircraft could pitch violently, throwing passengers into panic and creating a nightmare scenario for the crew. Captain Harris glanced at her, awe and concern in his eyes. "Emily, the plane is steady now," he said, but his voice betrayed tension. "We need to prepare for the landing. Air traffic control has cleared a small airfield in eastern Oregon. We have a narrow window to align properly." Emily nodded, already scanning instruments, calculating airspeed, altitude, and descent angle in rapid succession. This wasn't a leisurely maneuver, this was life or death. The plane rocked suddenly, a jolt that pushed even the seasoned crew against their seats. Emily reacted instantly. "Bank 3 degrees left, flaps 20, trim right slowly, don't overcorrect," the plane responded, though the turbulence fought against every adjustment. Sweat dotted her forehead, her hands hovered over controls, precise and controlled. The first officer muttered under his breath, She's incredible." Captain Harris remained silent, his jaw tight, eyes fixed on the instruments, trusting her implicitly. Inside the cabin, passengers gripped armrests, their knuckles white. Mothers whispered prayers, children clutched tablets uselessly in their laps, and even the flight attendants moved more deliberately, sensing the gravity of the situation. Nobody fully understood how close they were to danger, but Emily did. She felt the weight of every life aboard the aircraft, the pressure of responsibility magnified by her youth and quiet demeanor. Yet despite it all, she refused to panic. Emily's voice cut through the alarms and hum of the engines. Throttle right engine slightly, maintain airspeed. Left engine idle. Vertical speed 300 feet per minute. Altitude stable. Maintain heading toward runway 12. Her commands were concise, measured, and precise. Captain Harris and the first officer executed them without question. Outside the cockpit, gray clouds swirled and wind gusts threatened the fragile balance they had achieved. Every correction was met with resistance, but Emily's calm insistence kept the plane in controlled flight. The turbulence worsened, sudden bursts jostling the fuselage violently. The cabin shook, drinks spilled. A scream erupted from near the rear. Emily's hands danced over the controls, subtle but deliberate movements that balanced the plane's pitch and roll. Hold the bank, trim right 2 clicks, airspeed stable, hold it, she instructed, barely pausing to breathe. The plane responded incrementally, tilting and leveling like a ship navigating stormy seas. Captain Harris's voice broke through the tension. Emily, we're approaching a critical altitude. Prepare for the emergency landing sequence. We have to descend gradually and align with the runway precisely. Emily's mind raced. She calculated descent rate, wind drift, runway length, and approach angle simultaneously. Every variable had to be controlled. She gave clear instructions to the captain. Reduce altitude at 500 feet per minute. Flaps 25. Monitor engine temp constantly. Keep heading steady. Align with the runway gradually. Watch roll carefully. The plane pitched violently again, catching a crosswind. Emily adjusted trim instinctively, correcting for the tilt. Sweat dripped down her temples, but her voice remained calm, her commands clear. The first officer called out speed and altitude updates. Captain Harris followed her instructions precisely, each movement synchronized with hers. Emily felt an intense focus settle over her, a mental clarity born from years of flying small planes with her grandfather. Panic had no place here. Only precision and determination mattered. Outside, the landscape unfolded beneath them, mountains giving way to rolling hills, then to a patchwork of farmland. The runway in eastern Oregon appeared on the horizon, a narrow strip lined with emergency vehicles, ready for a potential disaster. Emily's mind calculated descent, wind, and throttle adjustments. She knew there would be no margin for error. Maintain airspeed at 180 knots, flaps 25. Trim right slowly. Prepare to align with the runway heading 120 degrees. Each command was a lifeline for the plane, a tether to survival. The cabin passengers, unaware of the exact precision required, sensed the tension rising again. Children whimpered, mothers whispered reassurances, and flight attendants braced themselves as the plane began its descent. Emily's focus never wavered. She monitored instruments, calculated adjustments, and guided the captain with authority far beyond her years. We're entering turbulence at lower altitude. Hold roll steady. Vertical speed 300. Flaps 30 on my mark. Each adjustment was crucial. Each second a delicate balance between stability and catastrophe. A violent gust hit, the plane pitched sharply to the left. Emily's hands moved instantly, correcting with subtle but deliberate movements. Bank 2 degrees right, airspeed steady, don't overcompensate, trim adjustments 3 clicks right. The plane responded, quivering but stabilizing. Captain Harris followed her commands with complete trust, silently acknowledging the skill and calm that belied her youthful appearance. Outside the cockpit, the emergency vehicles awaited, unaware that a quiet, determined college student was guiding the aircraft to them. Minutes stretched like hours. Emily maintained her focus, repeating instructions, watching instruments, and keeping the aircraft balanced. Turbulence and wind gusts continued, but her calm authority prevailed. The plane no longer felt like a chaotic, uncontrolled vessel. Instead, it responded to every input, every adjustment, every decision made by the trio in the cockpit. Emily had become the linchpin, the stabilizing force keeping Flight 278 on course for survival. Finally, the plane leveled over the airfield. The runway was close now, emergency crews lined up, ready for action. Emily issued the final pre-landing commands: reduce vertical speed, maintain airspeed, flaps 30, align with runway heading 120, trim adjustments minor, do not overcorrect. The plane quivered slightly as the crosswind tugged at the fuselage, but Emily's calm, precise instructions held it steady. Every life aboard depended on her focus, and she refused to let anything falter. In that moment, Emily Carter became more than a passenger. She was the quiet hero, the unassuming pilot guiding Flight 278 through one of the most harrowing experiences imaginable. Outside, the mountains receded, the runway approached, and the plane, stabilized under her skillful guidance, prepared for the critical descent that would determine the fate of everyone on board. The runway in eastern Oregon stretched ahead like a lifeline. The emergency vehicles lining the strip blinked lights in silent anticipation, unaware that the fate of 184 passengers rested on the hands of a 19-year-old college student and 2 seasoned pilots. Emily Carter's hazel eyes were fixed on the instruments, her hands steady despite the tremor of adrenaline coursing through her body. She had guided Flight 278 through stabilization, turbulence, and a failing engine. Now came the most perilous phase, the approach and landing. One miscalculation could turn controlled flight into disaster. Every second mattered. Captain Harris's voice broke the tense silence. "Emily, are we ready?" The plane pitched slightly in response to a gust of crosswind, and the alarm lights blinked red. Emily didn't flinch. "We're ready. Maintain airspeed at 180 knots, flaps 30, vertical speed 300 feet per minute, align with runway heading 120. Watch left engine output, don't overcompensate, minor trim adjustments only." Her voice was calm but commanding, each word precise, carrying authority beyond her years. The captain nodded and began executing her instructions. The aircraft rocked violently. Turbulence had not relented, and the compromised left engine made the plane's movements unpredictable. Passengers braced themselves instinctively. Some screamed softly, others whispered prayers. Flight attendants clutched their stations, securing the cabin as best they could. Emily's focus was unwavering. Every movement of the plane, every fluctuation in instruments was processed instantly. She made adjustments in milliseconds, micro-corrections that stabilized the aircraft incrementally. She guided the captain with exacting precision. Roll correction 2 degrees right, maintain heading, vertical speed constant, keep flaps at 30. Minutes stretched like hours. The plane descended steadily but slowly, every second amplifying the weight of responsibility. Emily felt the tension in her arms, the sweat dripping down her temples, but her expression remained serene. Panic had no place here. She visualized the landing as she had countless times in simulations with her grandfather: steady approach, controlled descent, careful alignment, and precise flair. She repeated the mental checklist silently, her voice only audible to herself. Throttle steady, trim steady, alignment correct, focus, control. Captain Harris adjusted throttle and trim exactly as instructed. First Officer Rodriguez read instrument readings aloud, confirming Emily's observations. Left engine pressure stable but low, altitude decreasing steadily, airspeed steady, heading correct. Emily acknowledged each report, translating them into actionable micro-adjustments. The plane responded, each correction bringing it closer to a controlled approach. The runway grew larger in the forward view, an endless strip lined with flashing lights, emergency vehicles ready to intervene. Emily's heart pounded, but she ignored it. She had one focus: landing safely. The crosswind intensified. The aircraft pitched sharply, tilting dangerously. Emily's hands moved instinctively. Bank 2 degrees left, correct slowly, keep flaps 30, maintain airspeed. The plane quivered under the gust, but the adjustment held. Captain Harris glanced at her, eyes wide. "You're extraordinary," he muttered. Emily said nothing, focusing entirely on the controls. She had no time for praise. Every calculation, every adjustment was a matter of life and death. The passengers below, unaware of her heroic role, clutched armrests and whispered to loved ones. The descent continued, slower than ideal but stable. Emily instructed minor adjustments with flawless timing. Throttle right, engine slightly steady, rudder trim minor, flaps 30 maintained, vertical speed 300 feet per minute. The aircraft responded incrementally. Outside, the terrain shifted from hills to flat farmland. The runway's proximity brought hope and tension in equal measure. Emergency crews checked their equipment, unaware that the small, quiet figure in the cockpit was orchestrating survival with remarkable skill. As Flight 278 approached the runway threshold, the turbulence intensified further. The plane pitched, rolled, and shuddered. Emily maintained absolute focus. Flaps full 35 at 50 feet. Align heading 120 precisely. Correct minor yaw left. Don't overcompensate. The plane responded slowly, quivering but stabilizing. Passengers braced, some praying aloud. Flight attendants gripped rails, steadying themselves. Emily's calm authority radiated through her voice and instructions, anchoring both the crew and the aircraft. At 40 feet above the runway, the plane trembled violently. Gusts struck unpredictably. Emily's hands were steady, eyes fixed on instruments and visual alignment. Flare at 30 feet, airspeed 170 knots, maintain bank 0, keep wings level. The plane pitched upward slightly, then descended carefully toward the runway. Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez followed her commands flawlessly. The landing sequence was tense, precise, and fraught with potential for catastrophe, but Emily guided each second with absolute control. The plane touched down hard, bouncing twice along the runway. Tires screeched against the asphalt, brakes engaged with a violent hiss. Outside, emergency crews held position, ready for any misstep. Inside, passengers gasped, some crying out in relief. Emily's hands hovered over controls, making micro-adjustments as the plane slowed. Maintain heading, keep flaps full, adjust throttle for deceleration, minor trim only. The plane gradually lost momentum, rolling steadily toward a complete stop. Finally, Flight 278 halted. The engines hissed, warning lights dimmed, and the cockpit exhaled collectively. Captain Harris looked at Emily with an expression of awe, exhaustion, and gratitude. You saved us all," he said quietly. Emily blinked, finally allowing herself to release the tension that had gripped her entire body. "We all did it," she said softly. The first officer nodded silently, equally astonished. Outside the cockpit window, emergency vehicles approached, but no intervention was needed. The plane was intact, the passengers safe. In the cabin, applause erupted. Passengers cheered, some crying, some hugging, others whispering words of relief and gratitude. Emily's quiet presence had guided them through one of the most harrowing experiences imaginable. She had transformed panic into controlled precision, fear into focused action. For the first time, she allowed herself to notice the reactions around her, the joy, relief, and disbelief on passengers' faces. Every life on board had been touched by her calm decisiveness. Captain Harris turned to Emily once more. "I can't believe what you just did," he said, voice heavy with emotion. Emily smiled faintly, exhausted but composed. "I just did what needed to be done," she replied. The truth was simple. Training, experience, and calm under pressure had guided her actions. But the magnitude of her courage and skill was undeniable. Flight 278 had survived not by chance, but because a quiet girl had stepped up when the world demanded it. The moment Flight 278's tires screeched to a stop, the cabin erupted in a mixture of relief, applause, and tears. The collective weight of fear, tension, and uncertainty that had gripped the passengers for nearly an hour dissolved into an audible exhalation. Mothers clutched children, friends embraced, and even the most stoic travelers whispered hurried words of thanks to flight attendants. Yet few fully understood the truth. That the chaos had been prevented not by luck, but by a 19-year-old college student whose calm, precise instructions had guided the plane from crisis to controlled safety. Emily remained in the cockpit for a few moments longer, hands resting lightly on the controls, absorbing the reality of what had just happened. Captain Harris exhaled audibly beside her. "I still can't believe it," he said, voice husky with emotion. You saved this plane, every life on board because of you." Emily shrugged lightly, a faint smile crossing her face. "We all worked together," she said softly. She didn't want to take full credit. The captain and first officer had followed her guidance flawlessly, and the passengers and crew had remained calm enough to allow the landing to succeed. But the truth remained. Without her, the outcome could have been catastrophic. The cabin doors opened, and emergency personnel swarmed the tarmac, checking the aircraft and assisting passengers as they disembarked. People stepped onto the runway, blinking against the bright morning sun, faces pale but alive with relief. Some were still in shock, whispering to loved ones, trying to process the experience. Flight attendants moved among them, collecting belongings and offering support. Amid the commotion, news crews and airport personnel began gathering, drawn by the emergency landing of a fully loaded commercial jet, a story that promised to capture public attention. Emily finally stepped out of the cockpit, her small frame almost lost among the sea of emergency responders and curious onlookers. Passengers looked at her with a mixture of awe and confusion. You're the one who helped land the plane," a woman asked breathlessly, her hand still gripping her child's shoulder. Emily nodded, words failing her for a moment as the reality of their relief sank in. The murmurs of astonishment spread quickly. A quiet girl, almost invisible before the emergency, had guided the aircraft to safety. Reporters arrived, cameras flashing, microphones thrust forward. "Miss, how did you manage to control the plane during an emergency?" one asked. Emily's eyes flicked toward the runway, still absorbing the enormity of the moment. "I just did what needed to be done," she said quietly. There was no boast in her voice, only a calm acceptance of what had happened. Her demeanor, composed despite exhaustion, contrasted sharply with the hysteria and relief around her. She had acted instinctively, guided by knowledge and experience, but never for recognition. Airport personnel escorted the pilots and Emily to a quieter area, away from the crowd and cameras. Captain Harris looked at her with a mixture of awe and respect. "Emily," he said, voice firm yet reverent, "you may not realize it, but you just saved lives. Every single passenger on that plane owes you their gratitude." Emily simply nodded, cheeks flushed from adrenaline and fatigue. She felt a quiet pride tempered by humility. This wasn't about accolades. It was about survival and action under pressure. The first officer, Rodriguez, shook her hand. "You kept us calm and gave clear instructions. I've flown for 20 years and never encountered anyone like you. Honestly, you should be a professional pilot." Emily smiled faintly. "Maybe someday," she replied. Her mind was already replaying the flight, analyzing every adjustment, every command. Despite the applause and recognition, part of her was still in the cockpit mentally, adjusting trim, monitoring instruments, and guiding the plane. It was a reflex, a skill embedded deep within her instincts. Meanwhile, passengers were being debriefed, some still shaking, others clutching their phones to call family members. The news spread quickly. A college student had assisted in landing a commercial jet during a critical emergency. The story was remarkable not just because of the technical skill displayed, but because of the courage, composure, and presence of mind shown by someone so young and seemingly unassuming. The media began circulating images of Emily standing quietly among the pilots, a calm figure amid chaos, and her story quickly captured the public imagination. Emily's parents were contacted and rushed to the airport, faces a mix of worry and pride. When they saw her, unharmed and composed, they rushed forward, enveloping her in a tight embrace. "We heard, 'Oh my God, Emily, you saved everyone,'" her mother whispered, tears in her eyes. Emily nodded, words failing her, overwhelmed by relief and the sudden weight of recognition. Her father squeezed her shoulders. You've made us proud more than you can imagine, but most importantly, you're safe." Emily hugged them back, the tension of the day slowly ebbing from her body. As the passengers and crew continued to disembark, Emily took a moment to reflect. The flight had started like any other, ordinary, routine, seemingly unremarkable. Yet in the face of sudden danger she had remained calm, applied her skills, and guided Flight 278 to safety. It wasn't courage in the abstract sense, or heroism performed for recognition. It was the quiet, disciplined focus of someone who knew how to act when others froze. And in that quiet, understated action, she had become a hero, without fanfare or self-congratulation. Later that day, news outlets broadcast the story of the young college student who had helped land a commercial jet. Interviews were conducted, accolades offered, and experts praised her presence of mind and technical skill. Yet Emily remained modest, repeating only, "I just did what I had to do. Everyone else did their part too." Her humility was remarkable in contrast to the attention she received. The truth was simple. She had acted instinctively, expertly, and decisively. That quiet, composed resolve had saved lives. And as the sun began to set over the airfield, casting long shadows across the tarmac, Emily stood quietly with her parents and the pilots, watching emergency crews pack up. She allowed herself a single, deep breath, finally letting the adrenaline and tension slip away. The day had been extraordinary, and yet she remained the same thoughtful, observant young woman who had boarded Flight 278 hours earlier, unaware of the test that awaited her. What had changed, however, was undeniable. Emily Carter had faced extraordinary danger, acted without hesitation, and emerged as the quiet hero of a story that would be remembered for years. By the following morning, Flight 278 had become the centerpiece of a story that captured national attention. News anchors replayed footage of emergency crews greeting passengers on the tarmac, while interviews highlighted the extraordinary heroism of a 19-year-old college student. Emily Carter's calm composure during the critical moments of the flight became the focal point of every story. Yet for Emily, the headlines and accolades mattered little. She remembered the cabin, the engines, the turbulence, and the faces of passengers staring in fear. What mattered most was that everyone had survived, intact, because she had stayed focused and precise when it counted. Airport officials invited her to a debriefing with the airline's safety board. In a brightly lit conference room, she reviewed flight data alongside engineers and senior pilots. They pored over black boxes, engine telemetry, and cockpit recordings. Emily explained her decisions step by step, the adjustments to trim, the careful balancing of throttle, the precise timing of flaps and rudder corrections. Her ability to translate years of experience flying small planes into actionable guidance for a commercial jet left experts astounded. "You did everything by the book and more," one senior pilot remarked. "I've never seen anything like it." Despite the praise, Emily remained modest. She described her grandfather's influence, the countless hours spent in a Cessna, and the lessons that had instilled calmness, patience, and analytical thinking. "It was about focus," she said simply. "If I let fear take over, no one survives. If I stay calm and act carefully, the plane will respond." Her humility drew admiration from the board, who realized that her heroism was not just in action, but in mindset, an extraordinary combination of skill, instinct, and composure. Meanwhile, passengers began to reach out, many having tracked media coverage by the evening. Messages of gratitude, videos of children waving, and letters from families poured in. One woman wrote, "You saved my son. I will never forget your courage." Another teenager sent a short video message, saying, "You are a hero. I want to be like you someday." Each note reinforced the enormity of Emily's impact. She had stepped into the cockpit as a passenger, a quiet observer, and emerged as a symbol of calm, decisive action in the face of terror. The airline announced an official ceremony to honor Emily and the crew. Flight attendants, pilots, and emergency responders were all recognized, but Emily's role stood out as unprecedented. She accepted the recognition with quiet dignity, standing beside Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez as applause filled the hall. Cameras flashed, but her focus remained outward, on the people whose lives had been saved, on the teamwork that had made survival possible. She understood the responsibility she carried. Being seen as a hero could inspire others, but she also knew that skill, training, and composure were the real keys to survival. As reporters pressed for interviews, Emily maintained her calm, measured answers. "I was just a passenger who could fly," she said simply. "The real credit goes to the captain, the first officer, and everyone on board who remained calm. Without them, none of this would have been possible." The humility in her voice only amplified the admiration of the public. Unlike sensationalized stories of heroics, this one resonated because it was authentic. A quiet, thoughtful individual who acted decisively when the world demanded it. Days later, Emily returned to her routine. Classes, homework, and the ordinary rhythms of college life resumed, but her experience aboard Flight 278 had left an indelible mark. She found herself reflecting not only on the mechanics of flight, but on human resilience, trust, and the power of calm decision-making. She realized that fear could either paralyze or focus. She had chosen the latter, and in doing so, had saved lives. The lessons she had learned in a small Cessna, passed down by her grandfather, had proven their worth on a scale far greater than she ever imagined. Her story spread beyond the United States, capturing the attention of aviation experts worldwide. Analysts praised her instincts, adaptability, and composure. University students began citing her as an example of applied skill under pressure. Yet Emily remained unchanged in her daily life. She walked across campus quietly, smiled politely to classmates, and studied in the library as though nothing extraordinary had happened. To her, the landing of Flight 278 was not a moment for ego. It was a testament to focus, training, and calm under pressure. Months later, Emily returned to the airport to meet Captain Harris and First Officer Rodriguez privately. They walked along the tarmac where the plane had come to rest, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections. "You taught me something," Captain Harris said, his tone serious. "Sometimes experience isn't just years in the cockpit, it's clarity under pressure, focus, and courage. You had all of that." Emily smiled softly. "We all had to work together. I just happened to know what to do first." The pilots nodded, acknowledging that the quiet college student had changed the course of history that day. In the public eye, Emily became a symbol of courage and calm in the face of fear. Awards, interviews, and invitations arrived from media outlets, aviation organizations, and even government officials. She accepted these honors with humility, always redirecting attention to the teamwork and focus that had made survival possible. Her story inspired countless young people to pursue aviation, to study emergency procedures, and to cultivate composure under pressure. Years later, Flight 278 would be remembered as one of the most extraordinary emergency landings in aviation history, not for drama or spectacle, but for the calm precision of a young woman who refused to panic. Emily Carter had taken the controls, guided a plane through disaster, and emerged as a hero, not because she sought recognition, but because she acted decisively, calmly, and with unwavering focus. Her quiet heroism would endure, reminding everyone that sometimes the most remarkable courage comes not from noise or bravado, but from calm, steadfast action when it is needed most. And in the quiet moments, long after the cameras had gone and the headlines faded, Emily would remember that day not for the accolades, but for the lives saved, the focus maintained, and the extraordinary calm she had summoned in the face of unimaginable pressure.